Welcome back, friends, to another episode of the Rigor Mortis podcast. My name is Adam, and with me again this week, we've got Jason on mic number 2.
This is great. We just spent the last 5 minutes of a sound check having Adam delight my ears with some afternoon delight.
I'm thinking this might be bonus content because I have the voice of an angel.
You certainly do.
I do. You loved it.
I did. I'm ready to go now. I needed that.
Nothing picked us up for our sound check like that.
What are we doing for a story today?
Well, man, we're doing Gary Ridgway, also known as the Green River Killer.
Ah, this guy, he's something special.
I guess so, especially in a bad way.
Yeah.
Very interesting story. This was one that there's a lot of documentaries about. There's a lot of other information about podcasts and stuff. But people cannot get enough of Gary Ridgway.
No, not at all. He's one of the more popular serial killers, so to speak. So.
For real, yeah, if that's a possible thing.
So where does Gary's story begin?
Well, it starts with his early life, I guess, basically. The upbringing of Gary Ridgway. Now, Gary was born on February 18th of 1949.
Happy early birthday, Gary.
Happy early birthday, Gary. Hope you're hearing us from your
prison cell,
cell.
max security. Okay.
Hope you enjoy this. He was born in Salt Lake City, Utah. He was the second of 3 children, 3 boys, actually, born to Mary and Thomas Ridgway.
Yep. And his home life, from what I understand, was pretty troubled. Some of his relatives have described his mother as domineering, and while he was young, he witnessed more than one violent argument between his parents.
Who hasn't?
Yeah, I haven't.
Oh, okay.
My parents were split up when I was young, so that's probably why.
It saved you. His father was a bus driver who would often complain about the presence of sex workers, probably like prostitutes on the side of the road.
What's he complaining about?
I don't know. Don't stop the bus. Gary had a bedwetting problem, which is the case with a lot of serial killers.
Yeah, until he was 13, which I think is part of the McDonald triad.
Yes.
Bedwetting is very, very common in serial killers.
And his mother would wash his genitals after every episode. How humiliating is that? Can you imagine?
Imagine my mom soaping me up when I was 13.
That's awful, dude. I mean, it's just not normal, you know? He would later tell defense psychologists that as an adolescent, he had conflicting feelings of anger and sexual attraction towards his mother and fantasized about killing her. I mean, I can see where that comes from. You know, the kid's getting his first sexual experience in a way after bedwetting and his mom's washing his genitals with a cold rag. I'm assuming cold. Maybe it was warm. I don't know. If she had any kind of heart, she would have used a warm rag. But anyways.
I agree. Well, Ridgway was in high school. He was actually held back for a year due to being dyslexic. And when he was 16 years old, he stabbed a 6-year-old boy who actually did survive the attack. What happened is he led him into the woods and stabbed him right through the ribs to his liver. And from what I had heard, when they asked him why he did this, he said he just wanted to know what it felt like.
To stab somebody.
Wow. Yeah, and he, like many of these killers, I guess not really. A lot of them do have high IQs, but he was recorded as being in the low 80s.
Which would put him at approximately what, as far as like...
Borderline between average and...
kind of somewhere where I'm hanging out.
He might be a little higher than you, but
He's a little higher than me. Okay, so we're close. We could have jammed together.
You probably could have. Hang out in the woods.
So he's in his low 80s for IQ. Now, Gary would end up graduating from Thai High School in 1969, and he married his 19-year-old girlfriend, Claudia Craig. He then joined the U.S. Navy. Let me tell you something, man. When you're right out of high school, do not marry your 19-year-old girlfriend. It's not going to go well for you.
Yeah, I have a friend who did that. I don't think it ended well for him.
Yeah, no, it didn't.
But joining the Navy, I mean, great career right out of high school.
Yeah, and at this time, he ends up being sent directly to Vietnam.
Okay, so maybe that's not so good straight out of high school. And he ended up serving on board of a supply ship, and he did see combat. Now, during this time in the military, Gary had frequent sexual intercourse with sex workers and actually contracted gonorrhea.
Sounds like fun.
Nah,
kind of festive.
I don't think that's fun.
Not fun, huh?
He was actually pretty pissed off about it from what I had heard, and he continued doing that even without protection.
So he's just passing the gonorrhea around?
That's what it sounds like.
It sounds like, huh? That sucks.
Yeah.
Terrible.
And of course, while he's gone, his wife actually has an extramarital affair, and their marriage ended up ending within a year. So obviously, very difficult time for her to, be that young and have her husband overseas at war. But also, obviously, he wasn't very faithful to her anyway.
Like I said, never marry your 19-year-old girlfriend.
I'll take your word for it.
Bottom line.
Don't get married, period. That's my advice.
Better dead than wed. Is what we're getting at. When questioned about Ridgway after his arrest, friends and family described him as friendly but strange.
And Gary continued to have relationships, and he actually had 2 different marriages, which both resulted in divorce due to both partners cheating. And his second wife, Marcia Winslow, claimed that he had placed her in a chokehold. Sounds
normal.
Sounds normal.
I always do that move.
Some people are into that.
Women love that one.
But he had become religious during his second marriage, going door to door reading the Bible out loud at work and at home, and insisting that his wife follow the strict teachings of their pastor. So he seems very controlling to me, to say the least.
And you know what? He would do some strange things. You know, Ridgway, it was also noted he would frequently cry after sermons or reading the Bible. I mean, I don't know if that's that bizarre, maybe. I don't know.
But what's interesting is he's so into this religion to the point where he's crying and stuff like that. But despite him being interested in the religion the way he is, he continues to solicit the services of sex workers and wanted his wife to participate in sex in public and in inappropriate places. You know, some people are into that stuff. I mean, that's... But I guess, I mean, being so religious and adamant about following the Bible and stuff, but doing that is kind of shows you that he has... 2 different sides of him, I guess.
Yeah, but you know what? To take it back to his infidelities and stuff with his first 2 wives, maybe they just were not into the same stuff that he's into.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I can almost see, like, if you're not getting what you need or what you want to be getting out of the sexual aspect of the relationship, you might find it somewhere else.
Right. And you know what's really messed up about this? Spoiler alert. Gary Ridgway kills women and dumps their bodies.
Yeah.
When he wanted to have intercourse with his wife in these public places, sometimes it was actually where these victims' bodies were found.
Okay, so that's just taking it to a whole...
It makes you wonder if there was already bodies there, and he was trying to, get off on fantasy of, like...
Oh, I see, even prior to...
Right, that's what I'm wondering, but...
Makes a lot of sense. Now, according to women in his life, Gary had an insatiable sexual appetite. Wow, sounds a lot like my dog. Get the fuck off of me. His 3 wives and several ex-girlfriends reported that he demanded sex from them several times a day.
Wow.
Often he would want to have sex in a public area or in the woods.
Yeah, and he actually admitted himself to having a fixation with sex workers who he kind of had a love-hate relationship with. He frequently complained about their presence in his neighborhood, but he also took advantage of their services regularly. Some people have actually speculated that Ridgway was torn between, his religious belief and his lust over these women.
Very interesting. Yeah, I could see that with this guy.
Yeah, and while he's married to his second wife, Marcia, they do have a son named Matthew at that time in 1975.
Now, a couple of years after his son Matthew was born, in the 80s and 90s, this is when it's believed that Ridgway had gone on and killed several women.
Yeah, I think up to 71 teenage girls and women in the Seattle-Tacoma, Washington area is what they're reported to believe that he had killed. And in court statements, he actually reports that he had killed so many women that he had lost count.
Wow, that's crazy. That's great. These guys always seem to have the number down, and it's always more than what they actually did.
Yeah.
Yeah. But a majority of the murders occurred between 1982 and 1984, so really just a short period of time. The victims were believed to have either been sex workers or runaways that he picked up along the Pacific Highway South.
Yeah, and I think he strangled almost all of them, and most of their bodies were dumped in wooded areas around the Green River area, kind of near the SeaTac International Airport.
There were also 2 confirmed and another 2 suspected victims found in the Portland, Oregon area. The bodies were often left in clusters, sometimes posed and usually nude also.
I think he probably did that. He seems like the type of guy who likes to go back and revisit his victims, I guess, or the areas where he did these crimes. So he probably kept them clustered so that he could go visit more than one at a time, I guess.
So weird, huh?
Yeah.
Has his audience waiting for him in a way.
Pretty much.
He would sometimes return to the victims' bodies and have sexual intercourse with them. I wonder how long after he would do that.
Yeah, I don't know, but he actually says, not that this makes it any better, but he says later on that he didn't find necrophilia more sexual satisfying, but having sex with deceased women reduced his need to obtain a living victim. So, to be honest with you, as messed up as it is, him having sex with these dead women is probably a good thing, because there could have been more women if he wasn't able to, meet his desires, I guess.
I see what you're saying. I wouldn't necessarily call it a good thing. Definitely a strange thing. But I know what you're saying. Where if he's going out and having his sexual needs met on somebody that he's already murdered, it's preventing him from going out in the streets, murdering somebody else, and having sex with their then corpse.
Yeah, yeah.
So I get that.
Most of the bodies that they did discover weren't discovered until there were basically just skeletons left. So I don't think they were able to identify all the victims. They were able to do most, but there was at least 3 that were unidentified. And Ridgway normally contaminated the dump sites with, gum and cigarettes and written materials that had belonged to other people, trying to throw the authorities off of his trail.
Really? So, like, he would go and find gum and cigarette butts and stuff like that, and he would just scatter them?
That's what it sounds like, and he actually even transported a few victims across state lines into Oregon to confuse the police. We saw that a lot with Israel Keys used to do that.
I was just going to say that it was very, very common for somebody like Israel Keys to do something like that.
Yeah, knowing that the jurisdictions won't work together as tight as they could.
And especially in this case, being the 80s and 90s, Yeah. But even with Israel Keys, he, obviously he did it later on, more in like the 2000s.
Right.
But it still took forever, and it just shows how things have advanced, criminally.
Databases
and stuff like that, yeah.
Now, how was Gary able to, keep luring all of these women, knowing, they have to be knowing that other women are going missing, but yet they're still out on the street trying to make money and whatnot. I mean, how is he getting them?
Hey guys, we want to take a moment to tell you about this new exciting game that we've been playing called Best Fiends. Now, true crime is our passion, but even we need the occasional break. So when we need that mental palate cleanser, our go-to for a refresher is Best Fiends. Let me tell you what, I was super excited when they approached us in regards to sponsoring our podcast because I'd been playing Best Fiends for months.
Now, I've only been playing this for a few weeks since you told me about it, but I really enjoy how challenging the puzzles are, and it helps keep my brain fresh for all of the information we have to take in while recording the podcast.
This game is definitely challenging, Jason. You got that right. And a lot of fun to play. So engage your brain with fun puzzles and collect tons of cute characters. Trust me, with over 100 million downloads, this 5-star rated mobile puzzle game is a must play. So do yourself a favor like Jason and I have and download Best Fiends for free. It's a great game. We definitely think you'll enjoy. Again, check out Friends without the R. Best Fiends. Download it today. I'm sure there was a lot of talk between the street workers in the area that probably caused a lot of fear.
Yeah.
In their everyday lives, knowing that there's somebody out there that's picking their friends off.
Right.
But he would do things like try to make them comfortable. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He would sometimes show women pictures of his son and to try to trick them into trusting him. I'm just a nice guy, kind of opening up a little. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think the one thing I saw is specifically there was one woman who he tried to pick up, and she was aware of all the women going missing, and she said something like, "Oh, how do I know you're not a killer?" And he opened his wallet to show his ID, which he did show his real ID, but he did it in a way that a picture of his son was kind of in the way. Like, look at me, I'm just the dad, and trying to make her comfortable. So I had actually read in a future interview that they did with him. They said he committed one of these crimes at least with his son in the truck.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, and they said, what would you have done if your son had, seen or found out what you were doing? And he said he would have killed his son.
No shit, huh?
Yeah, so he was...
Totally
he knew what he
unhinged.
was doing was wrong, very, very much so, but he, just continued to do it.
Now, after Gary would pick up these women and make them comfortable, he would typically rape them and then strangle them, a lot of times from behind. He wasn't looking at them.
Yeah, and I think
their eyes.
he initially strangled them manually, but after a few different victims had, bruised them up and cut them with their nails and things like that while trying to defend themselves, he started using ligatures at that time. And most of the victims he killed in his home or his truck or in one of the secluded areas where he dumped the bodies.
Not terribly far, yeah.
Right.
In the early 1980s, the King County sheriffs informed the Green River Task Force to investigate the murder. So at this point, they started to link these together. These crimes are looking very similar in nature. It's got to be most likely the same person. And also at this time in this country, that was when they were really starting to look into, FBI, especially the FBI, profiling serial killers and MOs. So
Right.
I think that drive also carried into local municipalities also.
Right, and anytime you have a task force formed to find you, you're quite the threat.
Now, the task force members included Robert Kippel and David Reinkart, who periodically interviewed incarcerated serial killer Ted Bundy, which is also very beneficial to have to have two guys that have been working in this field for a while that have been dealing with people like him.
Right, and I think Bundy did everything he could to help authorities. He offered his opinions on the psychology and motivations of this killer, and he suggested that the killer was revisiting the dump sites to have sex with his victims, which actually did turn out to be true. And if police found a fresh grave, they should stake it out and wait for him to come back. So Bundy was very instrumental in the psychology of finding the Green River Killer.
Now, Gary was arrested in 1982 and again in 2001 on charges related to prostitution. He became a suspect in the Green River killings in 1983, and in 1984, Ridgway passed a polygraph test. On April 7th, 1987, police took hair and saliva samples from Ridgway, but they were never able to nail him down. That's
kind of crazy how he's a suspect and they're keeping an eye on him and keeping in touch with him, and he's still committing the crimes and they're not finding him. So, it's pretty crazy how he's able to elude capture and whatnot. But he
ends up finding love again. In 1985, Ridgway starts dating Judith Mawson, and this woman becomes his third wife in 1988.
Yeah, and she claimed in a 2010 television interview that she was moved into his house while they were dating. There was no carpet, which detectives later told her he had probably wrapped a body in the carpet. That's messed up.
Little carpet burrito.
Yeah, I mean, he might have committed a crime at his house and there was, more blood or something than he had bargained for and decided to just use what he could to dispose of it.
In the same interview, she described how he would leave for work early in the mornings. Sometimes he would say this was just for overtime pay, of course. I mean, that's what liars always say when they're going to work early.
It's so funny to me how people who, do crimes like these, or even people who have affairs, and they're like, oh, I'm just going in for overtime, and their paychecks never have overtime.
Well, in hindsight, she's thinking that he must have committed some of these acts in the early mornings when he was saying that he was going into work.
It makes sense. I mean, there's some nasty hookers around here, but I don't think anything like there would be in Seattle. And I would think that these early morning, late night hours there's quite a few sex workers on the street, I would think.
She also states that she never suspected him of being, a killer of any sorts until the authorities had contacted her in 1987.
Yeah, and she actually hadn't even heard of the Green River Killer before they got a hold of her because she didn't watch the news regularly.
Question. The authorities contact her in 1987, and that's when she suspects him of being, potentially a killer. Why in the hell did she marry him in 1988, the following year?
That's a great question.
There's one for you.
Well, love makes you do crazy things.
I guess so. That's crazy.
Now, it's during this time that author Penny Moorhead actually interviews Gary Ridgway in prison, and he said that while he was in the relationship with Mawson, his kill rate actually went down, and that he did truly love her. Of his 49 known victims, only 3 were killed after he had married Mawson, and she later told a local television reporter that she feels like she's saved a lot of lives by being his wife and making him happy. So, and I don't know why she married him, but it's definitely a good thing she did, apparently.
It just goes to show that happy wife, happy life is a real thing.
Sure.
The samples collected in 1987 were later subjected to DNA analysis, providing the evidence for his arrest warrant. Now, what's interesting is they collected this evidence in 1987, right?
Yeah, well, they knew that DNA was coming along. They just didn't have the technology yet. So they were trying to, pool all this evidence in, knowing that as technology advances, they'll be able to test some of this stuff and hopefully have their guy.
Right, so kudos to law enforcement for thinking ahead.
Right.
And not only just collecting this evidence, but also preserving it so that it doesn't degrade over the years. Now, on November 30th of 2001, Gary Ridgway was at the Kensworth Truck Factory where he worked as a spray painter when police arrived to arrest him. Nothing like getting busted at work, huh?
Right.
Ridgway was arrested on suspicion of murdering 4 women nearly 20 years earlier after being identified as a potential suspect. When DNA evidence conclusively linked semen left of the victims to the saliva swab found by the police. So 1, 2, 3, you're done.
Yeah, and the 4 victims named in the original indictment that he was arrested for were Marcia Chapman, Opal Mills, Cynthia Hines, and Carol Ann Christensen. 3 more victims, Wendy Cofield, Deborah Bonner, and Deborah Estes, were added to the indictment after a forensic scientist identified microscopic spray paint spheres as a specific brand and composition of paint used at the Kenworth's factory. So they were able to not only have his semen on this, but they also had bits and pieces of the spray paint on the victims that clearly linked to his job.
So there's no way that this guy's getting out of this. I mean, it is definitely him.
No, of course not.
It's crazy, huh? You know, it reminds me of like a lot of the old Forensic Files shows where it's like they nail down a killer because a fleck of metal was found at the scene, and the guy worked at a metal factory.
Right. You know what's crazy is, like, I was actually 13 years old, and I vaguely remember this on the news.
I do, too. I mean, I'm just a couple of years older.
Yeah, and I've
been about 15-ish.
Didn't fully understand, serial killers and things like that at the time, but I was like, oh, wow, they caught somebody who murdered a bunch of people, and I didn't realize at that time they'd been looking for this guy for 15 years. But
oh, yeah, man. I remember his face being on the news, and I remember all this coming out, and...
It's crazy. Him and BTK, I remember both of them being arrested.
I do, too. Yeah, totally crazy for its time, right?
Yeah. So after he is arrested and the indictments come down and things like that, in early August of 2003, Seattle Television News reported that Gary had been moved from the maximum security cell at the King County Jail to an Airway Heights minimum security level tank. So this was, I think, so they could, negotiate a plea bargain and things like that with him.
I wonder what kind of a plea bargain you offer somebody that's killed a bunch of women.
Well, they were basically just trying to get a plea bargain that would spare him the death penalty in return for his confession to a number of the murders.
Nah, worth it maybe. Yeah. And worth it for the family members, too, to get some kind of closure.
Right. And, the authorities can see, if he readily admits to 40 of these murders, but he, adamantly denies that he did 9 of them, that they need to still look for somebody for those 9 people.
Of course, yeah. No, on November 5th of 2003... Ridgway entered a guilty plea to 48 charges of aggravated first-degree murder. Wow. And this was, as part of his plea bargain, agreed to in June, that he would spare him the execution in exchange for his cooperation in locating the remains of the victims and providing them with other details. So not only does he admit to it, but he's got to show them where their remains are.
Right. And while he was, giving his statement on his guilty plea, he explained that he had killed all of his victims inside King County, Washington, and that he had transported and dumped the remains of 2 women near Portland to confuse the police. I'm wondering if this is true that he did it in King County, Washington, all of them, or if that's just him, like with the Israel Keys case. He only wants to focus on the crimes in death penalty areas, where Gary Ridgway may only want to admit to crimes that happen in King County, Washington, so that another jurisdiction doesn't bring up charges on him.
That would make a lot of sense. The deputy prosecutor, Jeffrey Bard, noted in court that the deal contained the names of the 41 other victims that were not in the original indictment.
Right. And the King County prosecutor explained his decision to make the deal. He basically said, we could have gone forward with 7 accounts, but that is all we could have ever hoped to solve. At the end of the trial, whatever the outcome, there would have been lingering doubts about the rest of the crimes. This agreement was the avenue to truth, and in the end, the search for truth is still why we have a criminal justice system. Gary Ridgway does not deserve our mercy. He does not deserve to live. The mercy provided in today's resolution is not directed at Gary Ridgway, but toward the families who have suffered so much.
So true.
It is, yeah.
Boy, well put, Now, on December 18th of 2003, King County Superior Court Judge Richard Jones sentenced Ridgway to 48 life sentences with no possibility of parole, and 1 life sentence to be served consecutively. Wow, so he didn't, once you're dead for the 47 others, you're going to be dead again for another one. Is that how that goes?
Pretty much, I think. And he also was sentenced to an additional 10 years for tampering with evidence for each of the 48 victims. I'm assuming that has to do with the gum and the papers that he left and things like that.
And what's interesting is that would add 480 years to the 48 life sentences he's already got. So he's got death 48 times plus another 480 years on top of that.
Yeah, he's not coming back.
No, never.
But Gary was able to lead prosecutors to 3 bodies in 2003, and on August 16th of that year, the remains of a 16-year-old girl found near Enumclaw, Washington, 40 feet from State Route 410, were pronounced to belonging to another victim who is believed to be the victim of the Green River Killer.
Interesting. The remains of Mary Malvar and April Buttram were found in September of 2003. On November 23rd of 2005, the Associated Press reported that a weekend hiker found the skull of one of the 48 women Ridgway admitted to murdering in his 2003 plea bargain with King County prosecutors.
Yeah, I'm thinking that, he led them to as many victims as he could, but when you have bodies out in the woods, whether it be a human body or an animal body, wildlife is going to get some of these
scatter things.
Yeah, so
you could,
he could be like, well, I left the victim here, and they find a femur bone, but the rest of the bones are found scattered over miles of the woods. I mean, it's very, very possible. Especially Seattle's, got a lot of wildlife out there, but
very, very true.
In his confession, he did acknowledge that he targeted prostitutes because they were easy to pick up, and that he hated most of them. He confessed that he had sex with his victims' bodies after he murdered them, but claimed he began burying the later victims so that he could resist the urge to commit necrophilia. And he said that murdering young women was basically his career.
Now, on a taped interview on December 31st of 2003, Ridgway claimed that he had murdered 71 victims and confessed to having sex with them before killing them, a detail which he had not revealed prior to his sentencing.
I think I'm not going to take that. I want to take that with a grain of salt because, like you said, these guys make up numbers, for one. For two, they have concrete evidence of the other 48 or 49. He himself admitted that he killed so much that he didn't know the number. So how are you just going to come out at some point and say, oh, yeah, it was 71?
Right.
I mean...
Time to sit and think about it, I guess? I don't know.
I guess so. Well, where is he thinking about it?
Well, he is now thinking about it for the rest of his life in prison. He's bounced around to a few different places, I think. He started his prison life, I guess you could say, in solitary confinement at Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, Washington in 2004. From then, he was there until May 14th of 2015 when he was transferred to the USP Florence, which is a high-security federal prison east of Cannon City, Colorado.
Yeah, and then in September 2015, after public outcry and discussions with the governor, Corrections Secretary Bernie Warner announced that Ridgway would be transferred back to Washington to be easily accessible for open murder investigations. So he was returned by a chartered plane to Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla from the Florence, from the high security prison in Florence on October 24th of 2015. So it sounds like they're not done with him. They're still looking at him for some open investigations and things like that, is what it sounds like to me.
Well, because here's the thing, is that he claimed that he murdered 71 plus victims, right? But of that, only 48 have been confirmed.
That's true.
You know what I mean? So there still is a lot of unanswered questions. There's still a lot of things that are left on the table that people don't... that they don't have the answers for, There's people that are still turning up even to this day. They're finding bones, they're finding, skull parts, they're finding...
Well, let me tell you something, though. We could do a 20-part series on King County, Washington. This is like the serial killer capital of the world up there with Ohio.
I was just going to say, two best places for serial killers to live, Washington State and Ohio.
It's pretty accurate. I mean, there's a lot of podcasts that I've listened to with different stories from different people about King County, and there's always messed up shit that happens there.
Always. Stay out of Washington State.
Didn't Ted Bundy have something to do with there, too?
Oh, yeah, dude. Yeah.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, he was a Washington guy, Tacoma, Washington, I believe. So.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Makes sense.
Yeah, Seattle-Tacoma area. Definitely, watch yourself.
I think people there just need to find better hobbies.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think it gets cold there, too. Those bodies they're having sex with must be pretty cold.
It gets cold here, too, I'll tell you what. But we'll leave you guys with that. Hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you got any feedback, send us an email at therigamortispodcast@gmail.com.
Or our social media is at the Rigor Mortis Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And you can find me on my personal Instagram at rigormortis_JLEW and Adam at
Dr. Scullyfingers. You can find me everywhere as Dr. Scullyfingers.
everywhere.
Everywhere things are found.
Even near the Green River.
Even near the Green River, yeah. And on that note, have a great weekend, guys. We'll catch you next week, next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday.
Goodbye.